Actually, you don't see it anyways. Let's see. There we go. Good.
Position especially.
What's that?
I'm in the car outside Agnon because Mincha is 7:40 and you might not quite have finished the shiur by
Correct.
then.
Correct.
So,
That's okay.
so this way I miss as little as possible.
Thank you. That's good. Very good.
Are we still in paragraph 10 of Mama?
We are, I'll tell you, we're right near, no, actually it's paragraph 10, right near the end of the paragraph. We're going to do 11,
Okay.
which is one sentence, a little bit of 12. We're going to read something together, and then we're going to skip some pages for a reason, which we'll see.
So can you give me the first words of where we're going to start
Yeah,
at
we're
the
going
end
to
of
start
10?
with
So I can find it?
Uvnei Adam Gam Ken Shonim Ze Mize.
Okay, that's easy to remember because it's so true.
Right.
ובני אדם שונים זה מזה.
Which reminds me of something. Let me see where this is.
ובני אדם גם כן שונים זה מזה.
Yeah.
Yep, got it.
Whoops. Brachot Nun Chet. To look something up that just popped into my head.
Oh, there we go.
58. Is B, right?
Oh.
I know that the
Yes.
Schreibens will be joining us.
And Mona just left a message that she couldn't after all.
Right. I saw that.
Yeah. I heard that.
Okay, where are those words? Where are those words?
Abraham is here.
Oh, hello, Abraham.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he's on mute, so he hasn't said anything.
Good.
That we can hear.
I'm gonna mute you also. Such
Okay.
power, such power I have. It's unbelievable.
That's what the corona did.
Yeah, that's right. How you doing, Avram? Okay. Malka's joining us too, yes?
I'm doing good.
Good, good. Okay. Time we got here.
My wife will be right there. She's on the phone.
Okay. Oh, that could be an hour if it's like mine.
Don't you know it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. Let me put this on pause.
These will be small as we go into the late summer.
Okay, I'm gonna mute that. Okay. I can't tell you what page number, but approximately page 515, maybe. It's near the end of paragraph 10, somewhere near the end of paragraph 10. It starts with the words, Uvnei Adam, Gam Ken Shonim, and people are also different. So if you want to see if you can find that. Okay, so I'm going to start like a little background reminder. In this section, the Rab has been trying to explain the perspective of the philosophers. He described how the philosophers looked at the composition of the plant the plant world, the animal world, and now he's going to talk about humans. And we're going to be starting actually a few lines into his explanation, where it says, Uvnei Adam, Gam Ken Shonim Zamizeh. Also, people are different one from the other. So before we start that, as I was reading it now, even though I prepare this in advance, there's sometimes things pop into my head. And there's a Gemara in Masachet Brachot that talks about Moshe Rabbeinu and about the need, as we just saw recently in the Torah, in the Parsha, the need for Hashem to appoint a replacement for Moshe Rabbeinu, who was going to be dying. And it would be such an individual as that Moshe says that they have to have a leader who's able to deal with or to almost suffer with every single individual according to his perspective, his needs. What does that mean? So the Gemara tells us in a very famous line, which says, "Kishem shepartzufehem shonim, kach deotehem shonot." Just like their faces are different, so too are their opinions different. What does that mean? Hashem could have created human beings to all look exactly the same. But obviously that would be a bit of a disaster. And therefore he chose that every human being looks different, with the exception sometimes of twins and things that are known as doppelgangers. People look pretty similar to each other, but bigadol, the vast majority of human beings look different one from another. Not only do we look differently, but we also think differently. We approach things differently, which is why you can have differences of opinion, why you have arguments, why you have fights, why you have wars, battles. And so when Moshe Rabbeinu was asking for a replacement, who of course was going to become Yehoshua, it had to be someone who could stand opposite every individual and understand that person's needs, think about that individual, and be the leader for that person. I had a unique opportunity many years ago when I became the rabbi of the shul in which I grew up. As you know, I was there for 10 years. The last 10 years I was in Chicago from 1999 to 2009. And the reason I say it was a unique opportunity was that I knew the vast majority of all the members, not only knew their names, but I also knew their idiosyncrasies. I knew who was going to come to me on Tisha B'Av morning, just before the end of davening of Shacharit, and say, hey, how come we're saying this Nachem instead of the one that's more modern? I knew who was going to complain about the Mechitza. I knew who was going to complain about the Kiddush. I knew pretty much what to expect. So I had the opportunity on a very microcosmic scale to stand before people, not always, and have this insight already into what each person's approach was to certain things, which helped me in advance. When I knew someone was coming up towards me to tell me something, ask me something, that wasn't always complaints, thank God. It was mostly not complaints, actually. But whatever it might have been, very often I was able to anticipate what was going to happen. And so that's when Moshe Rabbeinu asks Hashem that when he has a replacement, when he has someone who's going to take over for him, it needed to be an individual such as Yehoshua, who would be able to stand in front of each person and know their individual perspective and their needs. So now let's take a look at the text with that little background. It says as follows, Uvnei Adam, Gam Ken Shoni Zamizah. He says, until now we've talked about plants. We've talked about the animal kingdom. Now we're going to talk about humans, that humans are different one from another. Ki rabam tiv'ehem notim v'ita v'ites sichlam imanetiyahi. Most people, unless they chas v'shalom have some form of mental imbalance, have a nitiyah, have an inclination towards something. And they go towards that. And some people like sports, and some people like Torah, and some people like music, and some people like architecture and mathematics, sciences, whatever it might be. And they're drawn towards that. Now, listen how he explains. Again, this is the rabbi saying what the philosophers believe. If his inclinations are fueled, let's say, by red bile, I'll explain that in a minute. It's an internal no, how do you say it? So the gallbladder is the mara. So
internal fluid or
sorry?
liquid. Internal fluids or
Fluid,
liquids.
thank you. Couldn't get the word out of my head. Thank you. Then, if he has that in his body, imo hamihirut v'hakalut, is a person who is quick and agile. V'mita'im amara shchora, but if he has a black bile, which interestingly enough is the Greek equivalent of melancholy, which means black bile, which we use in Hebrew to mean also depression. But if he has that, then imo hamitun v'hayishuv, that individual will be more calm and patient. And the person's character traits will be based on their temperament. You may find the possibility of a person who has everything perfectly in balance, not imbalanced, in balance. Like if you were to have the two parts of a scale, the two, what do you call them? The cups of the scale, that's perfectly in weight. If I want to weigh down something, I put more rocks on one side or weights on one side, and I change the balance. Such a person, with no doubt, is completely empty of the very well-known different types of desires, meaning he's a person who's able to control his needs, his desires, and things in life. And he seeks to grow to a higher level. That is the more divine level. He sits and he considers that which is appropriate for him to do. He's actually able to control his temperament. He's able to control his character traits. He doesn't allow anger to rule, nor his lust to rule, and nothing else. What does he do? He takes counsel with God in order that he should teach him the right path. That type of person is appropriate for him to be imparted with almost a prophetic spirit, or just not necessarily prophetic, but very wise, learned soul or individual. He'll be pious, but not a prophet. Because there is no miserliness before God, and we'll see the upshot to this in a minute. God gives that which He's appropriate for each person. Here's the kicker. The philosophers refer to that power, the active intellect. And they believe that an active intellect is really an angel that's hanging over the person to guide this individual in his actions. When a person clings to that angel to help him, that's in a sense, his heaven. Okay, what's he talking about here? We're going to see a couple of slides from Rav Aviner in a minute. But basically saying what's going on here.
Page 518.
518, thank you. Let me mark that down. Good. 518.
Got it.
Thank you very much, Avram.
You're welcome.
He's saying, now, some of these things he started to say we would agree with, like a person who's able to control. It's for those of you who are in my Mesilat Yesharim class or were in my Mesilat Yesharim class in the past, you know that it talks about being able to control your midot and work on them, etc. So yeah, that's great. But here we're talking about, we believe we have a direct line to Hashem, and Hashem is the one who runs the show, and he's the one who gives us these tchunot and gives us these character traits and midot and our struggles in life that we have to deal with. But the philosophers, again, they work from the down up. That's the whole difference between the philosophers and us, is that they say that there's this active, what they call the active intellect, or here they call it the hasechel hapoel, that is really what they connect to, and that is run by, so to speak, in quotes, an angel, and that's the one, the angel's helping them out. Okay, fine. Let's take a look now at Rav Aviner's commentary on this little section before we move on. Let's get the screen share. It sounds like I'm picking it up in the middle of the thought, because I am. I'm not quoting starting from the beginning of the paragraph from Rav Aviner. Right at the very top, it says, "V'zot ladat, v'zot ladat l'shitatam." According to their approach, meaning the philosophers, lo sheribono shel olam yatzar kol ela. It's not that God created or fashioned all these types of people. Ela kol yitzur b'havaya kolet kefi kocho et hanyan eloki. Each person to his ability is able to absorb, to integrate to the best of his ability, the godly or the divine. Mashal iktera meleat seva nozli. He gives a parable. Imagine you have a pot that has some liquid in it that is like a dye, a coloring. Tavalti letocha chatichat semer. If I take a piece of wool and I put it in there, hitiklot kamut gedola shel seva. We know that because wool is very absorbent, it will absorb a very great amount of that dye. Tavalti letocha bad ba'azanet, hu yiklot kamut ktana yoter seva. And take something else that is not as absorbent. It may have some color on it, but it's not going to absorb the same amount, and therefore be less coloring. Nylon, if I dip something in, kamut hatzeva shenispega od ktana me'ele. V'hadavar eino talui klal bekamut hatzeva matzui b'ktera. No matter how much coloring is in the pot, no matter how much dye is in that pot, the ability to absorb will be based on the character traits of the material that's doing the absorbing. Something more absorbent will absorb more of the color. Something less will absorb less. Similarly, wind that's blowing over the sea, doesn't do anything. But instead, the more skilled that the sailors might be, so the speed of that boat or that ship will be. Even if they're going against the wind, meaning the wind itself doesn't do anything. It's how they use the wind that makes the difference in how fast their boat's going to go. The same wind potentially could also destroy the sails. It could also cause them to sink. If they're like privates, like they're newbies, they don't know what they're doing, it could also fall into the water. The thing doesn't rely on the wind, or doesn't depend on the wind. The wind is passive. The wind is always going in the same direction. It's basically the same speed. Hold on, I cut off a word. Let me see. It's kind of cut off up the top, so I'll read it from my book. It's all based on the powers and the abilities of the person to make use of that wind. This is what philosophers refer to as hashgacha klalit, or general overwatch. Like I'm here now. just like this wind, she'ena noset panim leish ulesfina, koto pakid memshalti bal rosh katan, hamechalek lechol lekoach lefi hakatuv b'takanon. Okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of this first paragraph. What is he saying? God created humans. They're willing to admit that. That's fine. And each person is different. But how are they different? They're different because based on their makeup in their body, their chemical makeup, that God's got, so to speak, let's talk in numbers. God sends out 1,000 pieces of happiness. He sends out 1,000 pieces of sadness, 1,000 pieces of patience. And it's out there. And based on the person's ability to absorb that, based on their internal chemical composition, that will determine what kind of individual they are. And he uses that parable of the pot that has a dye in it. Now, the pot that has a dye, that makes perfect sense. But it doesn't make any sense what the philosophers are saying vis-a-vis the idea of a person being able to absorb that which God sends out. So why? For two reasons. First of all, it's nonsensical. And besides that, it removes Hashem from the equation completely. It completely removes Hashem from the equation. It's no different than if, here, let's do it like this. When you go to an event and they say they're going to have kibud kal, they're going to have light refreshments. So there's two possibilities. You could get there and someone dropped off, or maybe the hosts themselves put out food. And now it's up to you to go ahead and take what you want from the table. That's one perspective. And in that perspective, the one who put the food on the table, let's assume it's what's called a drop-off. A caterer made some food, brought it, left it, and the caterer left. Now, what is the relationship between the caterer and you, the person standing there eating? Are they the ones that are giving you the food? Are they the ones that are changing the way you're eating it? There's nothing to do with them. They're not the ones coming to refill the plate. They're gone. It's a drop-off. But if it's a catered affair where the caterer's involved, what are they doing? They're making sure that when your plate's empty, it's being filled. They're going to put more food on your plate. They're the one to make sure that the chafing dishes are filled, that the fire underneath the chafing dishes is lit. And all these things, they're involved in those moment-to-moment movements and decisions. They're not deciding what you're going to eat, but they're making sure it's available to everyone equally. But in the second case, the caterer is heavily involved in everything that's going on. The perspective of the philosophers is that God he put people here, he sent all these possible things out there, and based on how we are, where we have the Mara Shchora, Mara Aduma, where we have the red bile, we have the black bile, whatever it might be, that's going to be the determining factor of how I'm going to absorb all these things that God sent into the world. So one word for that is shtuyot. It's foolishness, absolute foolishness. And interestingly enough, after this, let me just a second here. Let me take off screen share. After this discussion, the king wants to discuss something else. The reason it would seem that he wants to discuss it, let's just take a look. It's one sentence, paragraph 11, Yud Aleph. Amar kuzari, so the king said, he basically says, I need you to give me a short class on the topic of the soul, the neshama, also known as the nefesh, even though not necessarily the same thing. Now, if you take a look at your book, you'll notice, just turn pages where it starts, we're not going to read it yet, paragraph 12. Just take a look at how long that is. Okay, my book is about 20 pages. Because it also has commentaries in my book. That's his short shiur. That's his short class on the topic of the soul. Now, before we even get to that and touch upon that, I want to read something to you. If you have Rabbi Korabkin's book, I think it's very important for me to read out loud a part of Appendix A in the back of the book. If you don't have it, just you'll listen and follow along. Because at this point, actually two pieces of background here. Even though this very, very long paragraph about the soul is in your book, we're going to look at only the first paragraph. And I'm just going to skip to almost the very end of the paragraph and mention a couple of things. I'll tell you why we're going to do that. The level of information, the way how the Rav is explaining about the soul, and there are other books that deal with the concept of the soul, is extremely abstract, very abstract. I mean, you're welcome to read through the pages and try to understand. That's fine. I did. It's not easy. Not only is it not easy to understand, it's very hard to teach. I don't like teaching something I don't fully understand. But it's abstract. It's hard to follow. It has, I mean, obviously there's some very sensible stuff that he's writing, but it's difficult. And then rather than go into it, I will tell you, we're going to defer this entire topic of the neshama, of the soul, to when we get to Tanya, chapter 4. Because in chapter 4 in Tanya, the author gives us basically the anatomy of the soul, of the neshama. And it's a very, 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 very different approach than Rabbi Yehuda Levi. And as I told you, I think 2 or 3 classes ago, had to mention to 2 of my co-workers and teachers who also are teachers. They not only teach in the school, but they've also given shiurim, who've taught and or learned the kuzari. When I told them I'm in the 5th essay, right, the 5th ma'amar, they basically said, good luck, because it's known to be very difficult because it's very abstract. So I decided what we're going to do is some of it and not all of it. And however, as I mentioned last week also, Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to call upon a lot of Greek philosophy, not only for explaining the neshama, but also to say that we believe some of this as well. And the obvious question would be, is how does Rabbi Yehuda Levi, the genius that he was, the paitan, the author, the philosopher, rely on Greek philosophy, all things, than to write in a large part of this last essay, not just in this section, but even coming up. So let's take a look at what Rabbi Karabkin writes about this question. I don't know what page it is in your book, but it's appendix or A. What's it called? Appendix or let's see. What was it referred to? Just A at the end of the text. Okay. If you have your book, you make sure you can find it. It's like I said, it's the very, very end of the text. Okay. A significant portion of the Kuzari addresses Greek philosophy. A discussion starts at the very beginning of the book. For those of you who were here starting about 4 years ago, what's that, Avram?
It's on page 597.
597, thank you.
Yes.
Page 597. In my book, it's on page 313, so it's different. Okay. Also my pages are tall. See, I have a different printing of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing, same book, but it's just different printing, which is why I'm never able to tell you what page we're on. For those of you who were with us in the very, very beginning, about 4 years ago, 5 years, whatever it's been, the topic of Greek philosophy came in at the very beginning of the book and continues in various places, especially at the end of the 4th essay and in most of the 5th essay. There's a good reason for this. Rabbi Yehuda Levi lived in the 11th century Spain, which was controlled at the time by Muslims. The setting for the kind of like the Har HaBayit. Couldn't resist that. The setting for the Kuzari is in the 8th century, which also was a time when one of the dominant religions was the world of Islam. Looking at modern day Islam, one would not readily associate Muslim thought with rationalistic Greek philosophy. But that is because Islam had evolved dramatically over the years and has shifted more towards religious fundamentalism. In the medieval period, however, Muslim thinkers such as Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, who were staunch Aristotelians, were completely devoted to Greek philosophy. It's kind of hard to imagine that Muslims were really involved in and taught Greek philosophy. We first note that We first note that Greek philosophy during this medieval period was the science of its day. As a matter of fact, the branch of knowledge known as science developed as an offshoot of philosophy. I don't think that anyone here would remember this, but I showed a very brief video years ago that was on YouTube about the topic of philosophy. And it also talked about that science, that what we call science, was an offshoot from the original topic called philosophy. Thus, we find the great Greek philosophers discussing topics that seem more scientific or mathematical than philosophical, such as physics, anatomy, biology, and logic. In other words, why would a philosopher talk about physics, or why would a philosopher talk about anatomy? Because that was the science of the day. All these sciences were all rolled up into one thing, including what we call today philosophy, in addition to the more metaphysical and existential concepts. The fact that philosophy was the science of his day is important because it sheds light on Halevi's and other great medieval Jewish philosophers' views on Greek philosophy. To Halevi, not all Greek philosophy was treif or heretical. This is because to make such a suggestion in his time would be suggesting today that all branches of science are heretical. Let me explain to you what he's saying. In the time Rabbi Yehuda Halevi lived, if he were to say that Greek philosophy, it's all no good, it's all treif, be no different than someone saying today that all the branches of science, whether it's medicine or whatever it might be, all these things, they're all treif, they're no good, which makes absolutely no sense. So too in his day, Greek philosophy was the science of the time, and people accepted it, and that was how it was taught, what was taught. Here's an example. Astronomers know a tremendous amount about the universe, our galaxy, and our solar system. They have identified different classes of stars, galaxies, novas, quasars, black holes, comets, and so forth. They've also been able to monitor the motion of various celestial bodies. For example, scientists note that our galaxy is in a very slow state of expansion. They also note that our sun has only a finite amount of fuel available for continuous nuclear fusion, so that were the sun to continue shining for another few billion years, don't worry, we're not going to run out of time, it would eventually be dramatically altered. Is there anything heretical about these studies? Nothing whatsoever. There's nothing, it's not heresy to say these things, that there are no Greek, they're black holes. You know what a black hole? Black hole is a place, a location in space that the gravitational pull is so strong that even light does not cannot escape the gravitational pull. So that's a scientific fact. We can't say that there's something heretical about that. However, science is a study of that which is empirically quantifiable, which means science is, I need to be able to measure it, feel it, touch it. The scientists seek to find reasons for all observed phenomena, but they seek to identify only those reasons that are detectable to the senses. So when they're posed with the question, how did this star become the way it is? The scientist's first reaction would be to attempt to develop a theory that would trace the history of the star as far back as possible based on similar observed phenomena. It would be quite unscientific for a scientist to answer the question by saying, God made the star the way it is. Science is the pursuit of knowledge, to understand how and why things are the way they are. To ascribe everything to God without first attempting to analyze the universe and its surroundings would therefore defeat the whole objective of science. We may also observe that part of human nature is to seek rational ways of freeing oneself from being obligated to some higher being. So when given the opportunity to do so, some seek to become the architects of their own destiny. Science offers this, okay, I'm not going to read this part, just a second. Go to the paragraph that says, hold on. The next paragraph that says many correct observations. Many correct observations and theories in the areas of logic, math, and science were developed by Greek philosophers. Some of their theories are considered heretical by Judaism because they ascribe multiplicity to God, chas v'shalom, or they assert that the universe was not created, and so forth. However, disqualifying the entire body of Greek philosophy because of its minority of heresies would be like a person refusing to believe that black holes exist simply because scientists have used black holes as part of a theory, arguing that God did not create the universe ex nihilo, something out of nothing. Just as we must selectively extract the legitimate fruit of science and throw away the heretical peel, so it would seem did Halevi view his duty regarding Greek philosophy. So he's telling us now the basic reason why Yehuda Halevi was able to not only could, but probably had to use Greek philosophy in his arguments, because even though there were some heretical ideas in Greek philosophy, Nevertheless, a large part of it were what we would call sciences. And some of those things were factual and were proper and were meant to be used. Now, this idea of trying to work your way backwards and take God out of the equation, which obviously is heretical, always brings us back to the question that should be posed and has been posed to scientists who don't believe in God, which I don't see how that's even possible. They talk about what's called the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang, the concept, there's this massive amount of energy that exploded, and to this very day, everything's still expanding, and that's how everything came into being. Okay, let's assume for a moment that there was a Big Bang. It doesn't go against Judaism to believe that, because it could be how Hashem created the world. We don't know. But let's assume for a moment that this is what happened. There was a Big Bang. So, Mr. Dear Scientist and Philosopher, where'd that energy come from that exploded? And how did it just happen that one little tiny dot in the billions of light years of space, we have life, and just so happens there's a sun at a certain distance that sustains life, and just so happens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's too many black holes in their beliefs. Yes,
Rabbi, this is a difficult concept to grasp, but at the time of the Big Bang, time was just starting, and also space did not exist.
correct.
So the concepts that we're used to of three-dimensional space, distance, and time, it was all compressed into a tiny, tiny, tiny
Correct.
pinpoint, as it were.
Correct.
And so
There was no time.
makes no
there was
sense
no time before this.
There was no time and there was no space.
Correct. There was no
And
space.
right, and all the energy and matter that exists in the universe today was concentrated in a point.
Correct.
And that's why the mathematicians call it a singularity.
Singularity. Nachon. It also has a different meaning
Right.
in space, also the singularity.
And in
Again-
terms of mathematics, because the equations of
Correct.
of,
Again,
because of
where did
Einstein's
that little point, where did that singularity come from?
equations don't answer that.
Right. That's his whole
Very
point.
simple.
That the scientist looks at it from and works empirically and proving, going back to, like, if I were to say, okay, I recently got a wireless mouse. Okay, where did that come from? Came from the box. Where did it come from? The manufacturer. The plastic. Where the plastic? It's a resin. And you work your way backwards. You reverse it. There's the fancy word. You reverse engineer it, and you find out all the components and how it came into being. Fine, very nice. But where do those components come from? Right? Where the original stuff? That's a different story. So because Rabbi Yehuda Levi, was living in a time period where Greek philosophy was all encompassing as far as many, many other, there's a word I'm working for, like mikzoa. I don't know how you say that in English. They use it in
Profession?
college. What?
Profession or subject?
No, not a profession.
Subject as in a classroom? as in
Subject is
school?
there's something, a nicer word. Okay, it'll
Area
come
of
to you.
study.
It'll come to me. But they're included in many other things. So he used what was available to him at that time, and he did what we would call winnowing. He got rid of the chaff and he kept the good stuff. One more paragraph only. Additionally, just as science poses a potential danger to Judaism because its theories are so widely accepted as fact throughout the world today, so did Greek philosophy, as espoused by the rationalistic Aristotelians and later rationalistic Christians, pose a danger to Judaism during Halevi's time. We thus find many important books written by the great rabbis of the time that were polemics against Greek philosophy. Instead of rejecting it entirely, these rabbis showed a great amount of deference and respect to it, as if it were the science of their day. Two famous examples are Milchamot Hashem, which is Wars of God by Levi Gershon, which is Rabbeinu Gershon. No. Yes. And the Guy from Perplexed, which is more well-known, which is the Mor Nevuchim by the Rambam. So just one more sentence. Moreover, these rabbis often had to struggle with many of the ideas they had held as truths within Greek philosophy in order to make them fit into the Jewish paradigm. Okay, now, I know that you have to go to Mincha in about, 2 minutes? Okay, so what I'd like to do is just to kind of take a minute. I'm going to stop early. Mention what's coming up here. We are going to read, not tonight, but Bezat Hashem next week. We're going to read just the first paragraph of Yud Bet, number 12, as basically a general idea of the neshama and the different types of neshamot that exist in humans, in animals, and in plant world, let's say. And then I'll give you a general idea what he says in the next 20 pages. And we're going to go jump ahead with a little bit of help with Rav Aviner. That's the process here. That will take us into next week. Also, next week on Monday night and Wednesday night, there'll be shiurim on Shemitah. It's a little bit of what's going to happen as far as if it's going to be held at someone's backyard or it's going to be only on Zoom now, but that I'll let you know in the next couple of days. And Bezrat Hashem, I would just wish everyone a good evening and Shalom Yisrael. Be well.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Shukra.
Tada.
Thanks so much, Rabbi.
You're welcome.